I think going around about 30. Where are they? Oh, you have them? Yeah, I'll give them out. I'll break them apart here.
Very well.
Here's some for you.
I'm all right. How are you doing? She has an appointment.
What?
She has an appointment.
Good Wednesday morning to everyone. We're going to have a shir that's a little bit different than our usual shir, the Monday morning shir. This is going to focus, this week we're going to focus a little bit on this period of time, the 9 days, what it's about, what we are trying to be mindful of. Next week we're going to have part 2, which is really the process of rebuilding and how we analyze and assess the days after Tisha B'Av. What are they about? They have their unique flavor as well. The 9 days, we're in the 9 days. And obviously as traditional Jews, there are practices that we follow, right? Halachot, minhagim, and they give us the guidance as to how we're supposed to feel. And the general rules that apply to this period of time are supposed to put us in this mood of awareness, mindfulness. We're missing something. We're using the strong word of mourning. For some, the fact that they don't have their fleischiks and wine is significant. For others, we're getting good suppers, and I don't know exactly why it's such a big deal for me personally, because I enjoy the milchiks that we've had for the past few nights. But nevertheless, there's a list of practices. We limit our trips. There's a question about going swimming, and all these things are there for a reason. They're not just there as what we are stuck with. They are there to remind us of something significant. So that's the 9 days. Now, I have in front of you only 4 sources, and most of the class is obviously not going to be reading text, but the few that are here we're going to try to go through. When we talk about Tisha B'Av, we commemorate the fact that the first and the second Bet HaMikdash were destroyed on that day. The first one is mentioned in the Tanakh itself. It relates to that day. Even though the text does mention the 7th of Av, but it was a process of 3 days. The destruction of the first temple ends on the 9th of Av. The second Bet HaMikdash, we have rabbinic traditions about the fact that we lost our temple, our hub, a location that brought the nation together, a location that connected us to the higher being, a location that gave us the ability to fulfill our mission to humanity, because the temple was not just for the people of Israel. It's for all nations. When you are not able to fulfill your potential, there's something missing within you, right? You know, the challenge that people have, that sometimes they have tremendous abilities and they're not able to use their tools. It's quite devastating. There's an emptiness that you have. And that is really what's occurring on Tisha B'Av. We as a nation have tremendous potential. We have so much to offer. We have so much that we could achieve, and we are missing something. And that's something that we mourn indeed on this day. Tisha B'Av is a time that we do not focus. We have not focused so much on the geographical loss, meaning the fact that we are not at that location physically, but there's this recognition that the reason we are lacking something physical is due to the fact that we are lacking something spiritual. In other words, there's something that we have to fix, there's something that we have to work on as a nation to merit a return, where we belong. This has been so much part of our philosophy, right? For the past 2,000 years in exile. That has been the focus. What do we mourn about on Tisha B'Av? Yes, we mourn the fact that we are not in Jerusalem. We mourn the fact that the temple was destroyed. We mourn the fact that we've been exiled and we've been suffering and we have no stability and we are always worried about where's the next attack going to come from. But there's a recognition that there's something that we have to fix internally. And that if we are fix that house from within, we're not a house divided, then we can indeed merit that return. So now, reference number 1 is where we spell out this idea. And the Talmud in Yuma, page 9, Amud Bet tells us the following. Mikdash Rishon mipnei macharav. In other words, we're sitting here, we're going to be sitting on Tisha B'Av, we're preparing ourselves for that day. So let's be aware, let's be mindful of what brought about that destruction. So let's break it down to Temple 1 and Temple 2, indicating that there are 2 areas we have to focus on. So, area number 1, Mipnei Shlosha Dvarim. First temple was destroyed due to 3 significant sins. What were they? Shlosha Dvarim Shahayu ba, Avodah Zarah, idol worship, Gilui Arayot, prohibited sexual relations, where there were no limits, no self-control, and Shvichut Damin, bloodshed. Harsh words. It was a harsh environment. You open the text, you read about it. We had flawed kings, we had flawed leadership. That was the flaw that we dealt with during the first temple. Fine. Reference number 2. Aval Mikdash Shani, during the temple, during the period leading to the destruction of the second temple, the rabbis tell us, Hayu Oskim, they were actually involved, B'Torah, U'B'Mitzvot, U'Gilut Chasadim. It was a frum oilum, as they say. They were very, very frum. Torah, study of Torah. There was a study, there was involvement in mitzvah, even Gmilut Chasadim. Wow, sounds like a good group of people. Truly, they are worthy of a temple. So the Talmud asks, Mipnei Macharav, so why was it destroyed? Mipnei Shaita bo Sinat Chinam. There was due to the fact that there was baseless hatred. Baseless, what does that mean exactly, right? But the lesson the rabbis tell us here is Lilamedcha tetikchiu sheshkula sinat chinam keneged shalosh averot, that you should know that the sin of baseless hatred is equivalent to the 3 severe transgressions: avodah zarah, gilui arayot, shfichut damim. Okay. So these are statements you've heard a lot about the focus of Sinat Chinam. Now, it appears that the flaws of that led to the destruction of the first temple were flaws that were obvious. It was clear. In other words, when a person is Oved Avodah Zarah, it is clear it is Avodah Zarah. When he's doing Shfichut Damim, when he kills someone, that's obvious, right? Second temple sins were not obvious. In other words, and this is something that we're going to be addressing, the real core issue of the Second Temple era and the real problem that brought about the destruction was the fact that they were, quote-unquote, in their own eyes, very frum people. They were very frum people. And in many situations, what they were doing in their own eyes was even a mitzvah. The sinat chinam was something that was not recognizable. They didn't recognize that it's sinat chinam. And that's going to make its appearance in statement number 3, where we are presented here with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, and they both say that you should know, Rishonim, when it comes to the first temple destruction, which 70 years later they merited a return. You want to know why? Shenitgale avonam, that their sin was galui, was obvious. They recognized it. I did something wrong. I made a mistake. I'm going to address it. I have a problem. So therefore, nitgala kitsam. So therefore, the ketz, the end to the period of exile was obvious, was clear. It was set. 70 years later, they're back. On the other hand, the achronim, the sins of the later generation, the generation of the Second Temple period, where they were very, people study Torah, gmilut chasadim, and if you would turn to them and say, you know what, there's a problem, and they would say, what do you mean there's a problem? We're perfect. Their sin was not nitgale avonam, so therefore, unfortunately, we're sitting 2,000 years later, And lo nidgala kitzam, the ketz, the end of this exile, is not around because we do not recognize we're doing something wrong. So these are statements from the Talmud. And throughout the years, I've heard many talks and lectures about focusing on the sins. In other words, focusing on the idea that do not view exile as something that's just physical. In other words, we've merited a return to Israel, right? But everyone does recognize that this is not a Geulah, right? Maybe it's the beginning of Geulah, fine. Don't tell me that we have been redeemed, right? Because it's more than geographical. There's something that has to occur from within us. We have to change in attitude. We have to look at things differently. What do we have to change? So we are mourning here two temples, right? So we have to realize that we have to fix flaws of the first temple and fix flaws of the second temple. Right? We're going to talk about both temples on Tisha B'Av. So obviously there are flaws from first temple period that we have to fix and flaws of the second temple period that we have to fix. We also know that flaws of the second temple, which do exist, are much harder because you have to remove that ability. We have to fool ourselves that we are perfect. Okay, now let's start with the first temple. That's right. That's really the easier one in some ways to talk about. You know, there's a section in the Talmud that talks about the kings of Israel that were flawed. And there are a lot of pages about that section because we had leadership, right? And true leadership is a challenge, right? You enjoy the power. It's very hard to let go of it. The ego is fed. You feel you're chosen by God, right? Many Meshugana leaders, right, believe chosen by God. Idi Amin, right, when he welcomed the passengers of the Air France in 1976, he welcomed them as Idi Amin Dara with a bunch of titles, and he mentioned chosen by God. Now, if you believe you're chosen by God and everything you do, you're chosen by some higher authority, there's a danger there. And we've suffered a lot. Humanity still suffers perhaps with people that they are chosen by God, right? So the Talmud breaks down these kings, breaks down their actions and their flaws. So the Talmud shares with us an incredible story. That there's a rabbi in a Babylonian yeshiva by the name of Rabbi, who at the end of the lecture, and he's lecturing about the kings, and he's teaching his students about their flaws. And again, this is not to put them down, but to recognize the human condition, to recognize the tendency we have as human beings, and hopefully by analyzing, that's what we do. In other words, when we talk about the avot and the imaot, and we are comfortable to even share a flaw, what are we trying to do? Not to put them down, but rather to recognize Torah is there as a tool to teach us, to become better, to learn from their struggles. So that's what we do regarding the king. So Rabbi is sitting there in the yeshiva, and he says, students, tomorrow, this is at the end of the lecture, and sometimes he's going to be informing them what to prepare or what is the topic and title of the next class. And Rav informs them that tomorrow the main focus is going to be our buddy Menashe, King Menashe, known as an evil king. He brought Avodah Zarah into the temple itself, uprooted Judaism. So Rav informs them that tomorrow's topic is our buddy Menashe, trying to be a little bit funny. That night the Talmud shares with us that Rav Ashi had a dream. And if you want to talk about a nightmare, here's your nightmare. Who appears to him in his dream? King Menashe. King Menashe. And King Menashe says to him, hey Ashi, you called me a buddy? You called me a buddy? And King Menashe brings up an halachic question to challenge Rav Ashi. And Rav Ashi was not aware of it, and King Menashe in his dream gave him the answer, indicating, right, this is a yeshiva environment. What defines who you are? Knowledge. Rav Ashi was lacking the knowledge. Who knew it? King Menashe. So Rav Ashi is very uncomfortable in his dream, the Talmud shares with us, and he says to him, listen, since you are so knowledgeable in Torah. How is it, I mean, look at Tanakh, don't blame me, open the Tanakh. How is it that you were so flawed and this desire of avodah zarah, of idol worship, was so strong that it took over your life? Can you explain it to me? So King Menashe responds to him that you should know, if you, Ashi, would have been in my generation during the first temple period, you would nakitna beshipule glima verait. In other words, what you would do is, when there would be an avodah zarah, you would lift your garment. You know, you have to think of Middle Eastern garment and Arab, you know, the way Arabs dress, like a garment that is hard to run with unless you lift the bottom part. You, Ashi, would lift the bottom part of your garment and run to the avodah zarah if you would be in our generation. So don't talk to me. In other words, these were the times. It was a time that perhaps indeed we had clarity of God, but at the same time, this knowledge of the Almighty was balanced with this urge that we can simply not comprehend to worship avodah zarah. That people, even when the greatest prophets were up there lecturing to them about values, about Judaism, about recognizing the one God, they simply couldn't get rid of their avodah zarah. It was in every pocket, right? Remember, as a child, that the color books would have pictures of avodah zarah. You know, kids learn through coloring books or books that are illustrated. And the avodah zarah was always this nice size idol. You know, like when sometimes you drive by houses and they'll have a big Buddha. So that's the avodah zarah that I always imagined of that period of time. And then one day I'm studying Rashi, and Rashi talks about the fact that they have this tremendous urge to worship avodah zarah, and even as they would be dying, they would pull out of their pockets, not the cell phone, but a little avodah zarah, and start hugging and kissing it. And I always had difficulty when I studied that Rashi at a young age, but wait a second, avodah zarah was big. Right? How exactly do they pull it out of their pockets? Right? How does it fit in their pocket? It was a difficulty I had. Until later on, you visit museums and you realize that they had very small avodah zarah that were pocket-sized. You had to take it with you, right? Don't leave home without it, right? That was avodah zarah, right? They had to have it. So those were the little, and talk to archaeologists or visit a museum in Israel, and you're going to feel very uncomfortable about our ancestors, because any area that they're digging that relates to the first temple period, even Yerushalayim, unfortunately, right? Boy, avodah zarah everywhere. There's a strong urge. So says King Menashe to Rav Ashi, if you would be in that generation, you would be lifting the garment to run. So don't judge me. Like, you don't understand. You simply do not understand the challenge. So there was a great thinker. His name was Rabbi Dessler, author of Michtav Eliyahu. There's a British connection there. He taught I think in Manchester, right? Where was it? I know there's a connection there. Gateshead, yes. That's a big sin. You have to delete that before it goes overseas to UK.
Rabbi, if it was so strong in that generation, did it stop? And today we don't even think of anything like that. What was the...
The Talmud shares with us an incredible story that after the destruction of the first temple, the prophets recognized how overwhelming this desire is and how strong it is. And they prayed to the Almighty and they say, just take it away. We can't deal with it. This is impossible. And there's a description of how exactly it came to an end, that they had an image of a lion that was made out of smoke, came out of the Holy of Holies. And it came to an end, but the problem is that there has to be a balance in the force. And this, if indeed, or when indeed, this strong urge and desire to avodah zarah ceased, the ability to reach prophecy ceased as well. In other words, there was a balance. You had a very strong urge to be oved avodah zarah, but at the same time, you had a neighbor who was a Navi and who could actually tell you, right, what your strengths are and what God wants from you and what's going to happen. So you had a way of dealing with this strong urge. When the strong urge took over and the Nevi'im prayed that it indeed vanishes, the Nevuah comes to an end as well. So that's what happens. And that's really
After
what,
Beis Hamikdash,
after the
first?
destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, and therefore the prophets that are there towards the end of the Babylonian exile and in the beginning of the Second Temple period are more living off fumes. In other words, they were the tail end of Avodah Zarah. And as a result as well, the Avodah Zarah is indeed in decline. Now it's a process, it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a process. And that could obviously explain why there's a void, right? In the Near East, there's this void that people have. They don't no longer have an urge to worship some kind of force. So what's gonna fill that fix? And it's interesting how Christianity, right, which is a watered down version of Judaism, spreads with such success. It's very logical to believe that there is a void and Christianity comes in and it takes over, and somehow, therefore, perhaps in our tradition, we view it as a little bit taking over of Avodah Zarah. And that's really what Menashe is communicating to Rav Ashi. You simply do not understand it, and we don't understand it, like Rav Ashi. Now, Rav Dessler points out the following. Rav Dessler says, there are times when a person knows that something is not good for them, but they nevertheless go ahead and desire it. They nevertheless go ahead and chase it. When there's something that prevents such a person from getting to their destination or to their desire, they're actually happy about it, right? A person that's not supposed to eat sugar and white flour, and they have this tremendous urge, and they just decide, that's it, I'm going to the bakery, right? And they zoom to the bakery, and it's locked. It happened to close early. So in some ways, what do they say to themselves? Baruch Hashem. In other words, that was good, because I really don't need it, right? I really don't need it, right? For me, a pizza would be such a thing, right? A pizza with cheese, I'm going to suffer afterwards. If I go ahead and I come and totally happen to be closed when I was not able to overcome Baruch Hashem, like my father would get off the plane when he would travel often, and his line would be that Baruch Hashem, they forgot the kosher meal. Right? That was the line. Why? Because he knew very well if they're going to give him a kosher meal, he might eat it. If he eats it, he's going to regret it. Baruch Hashem, they forgot the kosher meal. So, for King Menashe, who had clarity, this is not right, but he had that strong desire. The long garment was actually something he was happy about, because he would have a long garment. He couldn't run to the Avodah Zarah. It prevented him from reaching his destination. He was happy about the long garment. You, Rav Ashi, right? You, Rav Ashi, due to the fact that you are a person in an era when there are sins, you don't recognize the sin, right? And therefore you would not appreciate the fact that that which is preventing you is good. What would you do if you would be in my generation? You would lift the garment. Meaning, I at least recognize Avodah Zarah is wrong, and when there is something that's preventing me from reaching it as fast as I can, I'm happy about it. You, remember the words Menashe used, you would lift your garment to reach there faster. That's how Rav Dessler analyzes the conversation between these two parties, but it really tells us about that era. It tells us everything. And if during this period of time we actually are here to focus on two destructions, so what we could take from the first temple Churban is there are things that we still know are wrong. There are things that we know we shouldn't be doing, right? It could be, conversations that we know. I know deep down I should really not be sharing this information, right? It could be a desire I have for something. I really shouldn't be doing this, right? In such a case, right, this is a time to remember, you know what? If you have clarity and you know it's wrong, overcome it, right? Because the lack of ability to overcome is what brought about the destruction of the first temple. So that's what we could take from Churban Bayit Rishon. And that's the easy one, by the way. Because you know what's wrong, right? You know that it's not good for you. What about the second Beit HaMikdash? Now this is far more complex. This is much, much more complex. when they are in the process of building the second temple, so in the book of Ezra we are informed that there were elders there. The elders. How did the elders? Elders who remember the good old days, remember the first temple. And they were there for this return. We are told that they were bochim, the elders who remembered the first temple, who merited to see this return of the second temple, were bochim. Why were they boche? Why were they crying? They remembered the glory of the first temple, and this wasn't was a smaller structure. It wasn't the same. There were things that were missing. The first temple had these nisim, right? Miracles that were constant. They didn't exist during the second temple period. They were crying, bochim. And you think about the word bochim, and let's go back to Torah. Where in Torah do we find leadership that's bochim?
Esau and Yaakov when he kissed him on his neck.
Okay, so we do find that they cried, right? That's correct. But something of as roles of leaders, you turn to leaders because these are elders, right? These are leaders. And leaders are supposed to give a message, they're supposed to transmit the message of confidence, right? Where do you find that there are leaders, bochim, at the end of Parashat Balak, right before Pinchas shows up? There's a crisis there. You have one of the leaders of the tribes, of Shimon, who comes to Moshe with the Midianite woman and challenges Moshe and says, is this permissible, not permissible? Moshe, let's look back at your own personal history. Moshe here was challenged, and the Torah tells us, Vehema bochim. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu was simply, right, challenged, and he was stumped. When you don't have Moshe Rabbeinu being able to communicate the will of God, it's a time of crying. What's crying? When the child cries out, he wants that support. So that's what's happening at that point. When Moshe, their teacher, the one that had all the answers, simply did not know how to deal with a situation, you're boche, you cry. And that symbolizes the second temple period. The second temple period is a time of bochim, right? You simply cry. You don't have that clarity, right? There are no prophets. You don't have clarity. So there's this new form of Judaism that develops, right? Now we were actually given the tools to deal with the end of prophecy. What were the tools that were given? So at the end of the book of Malachi, the Almighty states through the prophet, Zichru Torat Moshe Avdi, meaning from now on, you want to know what to do? You want to know what to do? Don't believe that you're going to hear answers from above, right? But rather, study the text of Torah. Study the values of Torah, right? Study what it's about. Learn from it how to live. Learn from it how to think. Learn from it how to determine what is right and what is wrong. That's how you could deal with this period of boche, when you don't have that clarity from above, when we're crying out, right? Guide me, God. This is the tool that I'm giving you. Okay, so that really defines second temple period. No prophecy, no prophecy. However, you want to find answers, find it through Torah. And indeed, there is a generation where there is what? There is Torah, there is Avodah, there is Milut Chasadim. But what happens? You know what happens? What happens is that I develop a system of clarity, and I know what God wants because I study Torah. You study Torah in a little bit of a different way, right? You have different traditions. You have a different personality, and Torah is supposed to be not one size fits all. It simply doesn't work. If you have a different personality, if some people are more intellectual, so their connection to Torah is an intellectual connection. If people are more emotional, there's an emotional connection. If you come from a different region, people see things differently from different regions, different cultures, right? The way they interact with one another. What happens is, unfortunately, is that I start believing that my truth is the only truth. If my truth is the only truth, and then I interact with another Jew that has the wrong truth, so what am I going to do? I'm going to hate them. And they're going to hate me, obviously, right? Welcome to Sinat Chinam. There's Torah, there's Avodah, there's Milut Chasadim. But you know what? You know, oh, you're different than me. I'm going to hate, every Tisha B'Av we sit down and we study the section of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What does that section describe? It describes a story, well-known story, of someone that is invited to a party, right? And he sends his messenger and says, invite me Kamsa, and who does he invite by mistake? Bar Kamsa. And the Talmud tells us, and that led to a tremendous fight. The rabbis did not act. They bring in the Romans, brings about the disruption. So everyone is familiar with this term, Al Kamsa u Bar Kamsa. Because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. And the famous and the well-known question is, wait a second. Bar Kamsa is the one that went ahead and brought government officials into it, brought about the destruction. Kamsa, the one that wasn't invited, why was he to blame? In other words, why for the past 2,000 years we mention this guy's name as someone that brought about the destruction? He wasn't even aware of it, right? The first time he heard about it is when he looked at his window and he saw the temple burning. Like, why is the poor guy mentioned in the conversation? So the Maharal, right, great thinker of the late 16th, early 17th century, the one that did not create the golem, meaning there are a lot of legends about it, but there's no record. But what he did create is tremendous literature that has inspired many for many years. And he says that you should know that when you have sinat chinam, lokeach lo ohev, lachlok im acher shesone oto. In other words, you know what sinat chinam is? You create a clique, right? You're going to be associated with people that look like you, that think like you, and you say, I'm not a person that carries sinat chinam. What do you mean? I have a best friend, right? But who do you choose as a friend? Someone that thinks like you, right? Someone that looks like you, someone that talks like you. He's your buddy, right? We're very close. I love him. But the truth is that is not really ahava. That's just the selfish need you have to be associated with people. But when you interact with someone that's different, that's when the sinah comes out. Therefore, kamsa, the quote-unquote friend, in other words, if you have the ability to take someone and throw him out of your house because he came uninvited and shame him, right? And this fellow Bar Kamsa was kicked out, was willing to pay for the party, right? But you are a man of hatred. Even your buddies are not buddies. And if you are a buddy of such a person, that indicates that you are part of the problem. Okay, this really symbolizes this challenging the generation, the sinat chinam. To share with you the era itself. I'll quote from Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, known as the Netziv. He headed the Volozhin Yeshiva, and when you talk about the modern day yeshiva movement, you cannot talk about the modern day yeshiva movement. Yeshivot always existed, right? In Europe in general, there were yeshivot, but they were localized. When you had people studying by the local rabbi, the Chatam Sofer at a yeshiva, but the idea of really an international yeshiva, of people coming from throughout Europe, right, to go ahead and study with the greatest of scholars. Modern day yeshiva, you look at Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin and Volozhin, yeshiva that was opened from 1803 to 1892, and really set the pattern for what we are familiar with today in Judaism. So he writes the following, that you should know, when you read about, we just read a section in the Talmud. First temple, Shvichut Damim. Second temple, right, what was the only problem? Sinat Chinam. Says Netziv, you should know, Be'emet, Haya Shvichut Damim Larov Bebayit Sheni. You think we were killing one another? Guess what? I have some bad news for you. We were killing one another during the years that led to the destruction of the Second Temple. How does he know it? He says, open up Josephus. Open up Josephus. We were killing one another. You know that there was even a day, the 9th of Adar, when people would mourn at a specific time, the fact that there were followers of Hillel and Shammai that killed one another due to their disagreement. Now, you think about it, when you talk about Hillel and Shammai, don't we always say that it is a machloket l'shem shamayim? We always say that. And here we have literature from the Jerusalem Talmud that states that they were killing one another. Which one's true? Answer is they're both true. Because you had Hillel and Shammai who are righteous individuals who want to figure out how to live a Jewish life. And they had disciples who were actually righteous people that were really interested in such teachings and wanted to know the truth. But then you have like the third circle around, who are basically like Hasidim of Hillel and Shammai, meaning people that were part of that soccer team. And some people walked around with the banner of Shammai, and some people walked away with the banner Hillel. But it had nothing to do with the values. It had nothing to do with the Torah. It had to be it only related to the fact that they identified with a movement. If you have a movement and there's someone that's not part of your movement, you're going to hate him, you're going to kill him. This is what we are being told. These are incredible words from the most traditional authorities. But nevertheless, he notes, you want to know the problem, that the real issue of the years and the attitude and the environment that led to the destruction of the Second Temple was that when they killed people, they thought it was a mitzvah. They thought it's a great thing. Why? Because they would see someone that is doing something different than them. He's an apikoros, right? He's a tzduki, right? He is someone that is a sadusi. So therefore, he knows, magaram, and you want to know what causes a person that when they see someone that's different to believe that they are a heretic and you should kill them. You know what the root problem is? Sinat chinam. That's the bottom line. Mitzvah lehorgo, and as a result, they believe that it's a mitzvah lehorgo, and lo yadu machatatam. You would turn to them and say, you just killed someone, right? You insulted him. You attacked someone for being a little bit, for looking different, right? How do you defend it? You know what he's going to say? What do you mean? I'm going to get olam haba for it. I just got rid of someone that's destructive to our society. This is the problem that led to Churban Bayit Sheni. This is what we are being told. Now, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? So, we're going to move on to reference number 3. Now, up until now, I've been giving you a talk that's been a very traditional talk, right? This is a period of time to fix flaws, which stands true. It has nothing to do with geography, I've been saying, right? It's an issue we have, and when we merit, we're going to return to the land of Israel. Reference number 4 is supposed to make us think a little bit different, that we have to adjust our thinking. Story time, well-known story. You have here a rabbi by the name of Resh Lakish. So this is early 3rd century, in the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, northern Israel. And Resh Lakish was Sachi B'Yardena. What was he doing? Swimming in the Jordan River. Nice? So, as he is swimming there, a Babylonian rabbi by the name of Rabbi Bar Chana, there's a history why he has that interesting name, he comes by and he gives him a hand. Gives him a hand, maybe to help him out of the water. And Rish Lakish responds and says to him, Sanina lechu, I hate you guys, you Babylonians. He was critical of the Jew who remained in Babylonia. Why was he critical of this Babylonian Jew? So he quotes a verse from Shir HaShirim, and the message is basically, and you could read it in English, and the verse in Shir HaShirim addresses the idea that you should know, if it would be, this is a rabbinic reading of it, if it would be from silver, it would be something that remains. If on the other hand, it is made out of erez, out of wood, it's going to go ahead and rot eventually. And in the last line of the Hebrew, Achshav, the problem is that when indeed in the days of Ezra, we had the option of returning to Israel. And you guys, you Babylonians, what did you guys do? The majority of the Jewish people did not return. They stayed in Babylonia. They were comfortable there. They had yeshivot even. So therefore he says, Achshav she'alitem, now that you came up, and the aliyah was a shvach ha'maisa, aliyah was a weak one. It was not the silver aliyah, which would have been one that remains intact. Now that you came up like erez, now that you came up like, and it was an aliyah that was not as durable, it was more like a wooden aliyah, he calls it. Rekev sholet, but the fact is that the wood did not remain. In other words, the problem that brought about, the destruction was a lack of aliyah from Babylonian Jewry. Okay? This is a very strong statement of Rish Lakish. And obviously, if you would be hearing talks of religious Zionists, this is a very strong statement to make a point, right? You have to make your way to Israel, which is true. You can't deny it, by the way. However, how do you bring the two together? When up until now, when for the first 40 minutes, what are we talking about? Change actions. Focus on actions. Don't look at geography. Statement number 4, what is it saying? Yeah, you got to make your way. You got to make your way to the land of Israel. So, what I would like to suggest is the idea that if indeed, the flaw that brought about the destruction of the Second Temple, and the reason we are in exile, is because we couldn't get along with people who are a little bit different. The flaw will only be fixed if we return again to the land of Israel, and yes, get along with people who are a little bit different. You hear the idea? In other words, what Rish Lakish was saying is obviously they had to fix their spiritual flaw. But where can you fix it? When you try to do things together. When you try to bring people together in a synagogue, and obviously how much more so in the land of Israel, and try to build together, and you are able to do it with someone that thinks a little bit differently. When you are able to do it with someone that looks a little bit differently, that is the end of Sinat Chinam. This is what he is stating. We got to be there. And presence in the land of Israel may not be a geulah, but obviously it is the beginning if you use it correctly. I love sharing the story how in Chile, we lived in Chile for some time, and when I was in Kollel there, we had a shacharit in the Kollel. There were times that some people would be away, and we only had 10 people for shacharit. Now think about it, the responsibility when I woke up in the morning, and I would want to sleep in, and I knew that if I don't go to minyan, the whole country is not going to have a minyan. You realize your responsibility, the one person that you are the minyan. Now what was incredible about that gathering was that there were times that we were 10 people in the room, and we had 5 different nuschaot, 5 different prayer books. Because we had the Ashkenaz, we had the Sfard, we had the Edot HaMizrach, we had a Yemenite who has his own tradition, a fellow by the name of Guri, and we had a Chabad fellow. So you had 5 different nuschaot, 10 people. Now that's an achievement. We all, you get along, everyone, that was an achievement. That is what really symbolizes the idea. That is what redemption is. You stick to your tradition, but value, appreciate. He's a little bit different. Fine, there's room for him as well. We are mishpacha. There was someone, Avram Friedman, who lives in Israel now, he mentioned the fact how one of his trips to Israel, he comes back, and he took a bus back from the airport. He took a TTC. And he said he started laughing on the TTC. Why? He says in Israel, you sit on a bus, on an Egged bus. What's happening? Everyone's having a conversation. Everyone's telling one, it's like mishpacha. It could be a person you never met. You're going to go ahead and start sharing. Why are you doing that? That's Israel. The TTC, complete silence. Right? There's not like. So he started laughing, and you feel it, right? You feel it in Israel. I remember when I took our Aaron when he was 12. We went to Israel, and it was a cold January day. But lucky Aaron, his mother wasn't there, so he didn't have to wear a coat. Right? But little did he know that there's going to be 500 mothers, because every second woman there, little did he know what Israel is really about. So,
which nusach did they decide on?
We had some excitement. Believe it or not, we had our own excitement, but I think it symbolized the idea. So we're going to go ahead and try to focus a little bit on the positive of that it does exist. And by the way, Menachem Begin, right? He had that understanding and that appreciation. There's a story. This is more than a story. This is a historical fact. The 1981 election. So here's something that's historical that I actually remember a little bit, so I feel so good about it. So 1981, right? We talk about 67, I don't remember, 73. The only thing I remember from 73 is that we happened to be that sukkahs in Memphis. I was 4 years old. We went to visit an aunt and uncle there, and I swallowed a penny. That's what I remember. That's the only thing I remember from the Yom Kippur War, that I swallowed a penny. But 1981, I remember I was 11 years old at the time, and we had elections there, and it was between Begin and Shimon Peres, right? And who was ahead in the polls? Actually, Shimon Peres. Shimon Peres. He brought in Rabbi into the picture. It's a fascinating election, like everything in Israel is fascinating. So they had a rally, probably in Tel Aviv, in what they called at the time Kikar Hamdina, and one of the speakers, and this is a Ma'arach, a left, a Shimon Peres rally, and one of the speakers who gets up was a comedian. And now, comedian, who are they going to side with? Right or left? Right? Got your hand? I think we all know it's going to be the left. So this comedian by the name of Dudu Topaz gets up, and he makes his jokes, which works well, about the Likud and the Likudnikim and the followers of Begin. But then he says, you should know that these Likud people are not even devoted. And he says the following, Hachachachim shel Likud, the riffraff of the Likud, they don't even serve in the army. Or something like that, the Chachachim. Who is he referring to, obviously, when he talked about the riffraff? In Israel at the time, and this is really a newer country, when you have many people who came from Morocco, from Iraq, from Iran, the Sfaradim. It was a derogatory way of identifying them, Chachachim. And he made the statement, some people complained, some people felt it wasn't right. The next morning, Begin was preparing for a rally, and his advisors, and this is panic mode, they were concerned, getting close a few days before election. And each advisor is coming up with ideas of what Begin should focus on in his speech. Begin, by then already, by 8 a.m., read all the newspapers, and he says, no, I know what I'm talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. So Begin gets up that night at a Likud rally, and he stands there, and he says, let me quote to you what was said last night in this location by someone from the left, someone from the Ma'arach, from the labor movement. And he quotes Dudu Topaz, takes off his glasses, and he reads, Chachachim shel Likud. And Begin says, Ad hayom lo shamati ma ze chachachim. In other words, I don't even know what it is, but let me tell you who he's referring to. This is what Begin says. And Begin gets up, and he says, he's talking about Acheinu v'Achiotenu Asfaradim bnei Edot HaMizrach. And then he gets up and he says, and do you know what they did? And he starts talking about the wars in the Machteret, meaning when they were fighting to establish a Jewish state. And there was a Farbstein, some of the historians remember from 1946-47, when two of them were, Barzani and Farbstein, were captured by the British and were supposed to be killed. And they committed suicide just for the sake of dignity. And Begin gets up and expresses it with his emotion. And he said the following, Hem Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, Yehudim, he calls out. That was Begin. It's a clip that's worthwhile to see. He won the elections. And many people attribute it to his understanding. We are one nation. This is the essence of how we reach redemption. You want to know how you reach redemption? You come back to the land of Israel and realize, you know what? There are those that are different, but I'm going to see the Jewishness in them, and that is how we're going to bring about a rejection. So Rish Lakish is saying, of course Sinat Chinam is a problem. Where are you going to fix it? You're not going to end Sinat Chinam if each person, if one person lives in Etobicoke, and another Jew lives in Oakville, and another Jew lives in Barry, and I say, oh, I love Jews. What was the last Jew you saw? Well, I've seen one a few months ago. That's not, or Collingwood, or that's not exactly how you end Sinat Chinam. You know how you end Sinat Chinam? You bring us together, and naturally we're going to want to be at one another's throats, because that's who we are. But you realize, you know what? We are all part of a family. That is how it comes to end. Rish Lakish is making that statement, and that is what he is teaching us. And that is the essence of what we are supposed to fix. And if you look at what's happening now in the state of Israel, right? The news obviously is going to bring the negative, but the positive is occurring day in, day out. There are positive interactions where we are doing what Rish Lakish wants, besides us here who are still living in Chutz La'aretz. But the fact is that we're very, very proud, and we are very happy about the fact that so many of us are in Israel and doing their part of bringing people together. One more, story that brings about a positive idea, that there's a sensitivity that does exist. In Israel, there are TV programs, and they are creative. I don't know if you're aware of it, that the Jewish people are creative writers. Now, their secular TV in Israel has a love of shows that talk about Haredim. If you have a good show about Haredim, it takes off. Recently, the trend has been that the shows about the Haredim are not to focus on how they view them as crazies, but about the struggles that they have. They see them as human beings. There was a shtisel a few years ago, and it took off, and it was excellent, right? You had the best of actors. You had Dovale Glickman, the biggest names in media, the biggest names in acting in Israel, took over their roles and they studied it. Be'in, in other words, it used to be, or if you would watch an old, Hollywood movie where they want to show Haredim, they didn't even know how to put on the hat the way Jews are supposed to, right? They simply did not know how to do it. But here, they studied it, where they did an excellent job. They did an excellent job. Okay? And they did it was a beautiful, they were just showing them as humans, as people that struggle. Recently there was another show about a half a year ago, or a year ago, and this is something I read about, I heard about from my brother, called Shabavnikim. Shabavnikim. What is that show about? So you know what Shabavnikim are. Shabavnikim are basically a term, I don't know exactly when it came in to existence, of students who study in yeshiva, quote unquote, but they're not really achieving anything. They're what we used to call in our days bench warmers. Today already a lot of them are not even on the bench, meaning they're outside of the Bet Midrash. So there's a show about them, because we know in the yeshivot, Baruch Hashem, there are thousands upon thousands that are achieving incredible things in knowledge. And we have Torah today that is on the highest level perhaps ever. At the same time, when you create a whole system, there are those that don't belong there, and they have the title Shabavnikim. So they have a program about the Shabavnikim. Fine. So they go ahead, and it's a show about a yeshiva. And again, these actors studied it well, that if you see even a clip of a little bit of the show, and then afterwards they'll show you the actor without the garb, you start yelling at him. Where's your kippah and beard? What do you mean? You're a frum guy. And they do such a good job that you have difficulty realizing that this is acting. So one of the scenes, there was a scene where there's a rabbi in the Bet Midrash, the actor, giving a lecture, a mashgiach slash Rosh Yeshiva. And as he is giving the lecture, now you have to realize that they have to fill a room with people that look like Haredim. So they have a few actors, and then what did they do? They got extras. How did they get extras? Not so hard. They went out to the street, and they found some real Shabavnikim, and they put them in the things. There was a whole to-do about a half a year ago that a few of them were identified and sent out of the yeshiva as a TV program, because fascinating it is. So they have, so the extras are sitting there, and these are yeshiva students. Some of them were actually, from what I understand, even decent, nice yeshiva students that needed the extra few dollars. They're sitting there as extras in the show, and the actor is giving their talk. And he's trying to convey the message that Judaism is not just what you do with books, it's what you make yourself into be. And he says, Ele Sfarim Kdoshim. He picks up like a sefer, some Mesilas Yesharim. Atem choshim sheze shaveh mash. Do you think this is worth anything if you don't become a better person? So the mashgiach slash Rosh Yeshiva takes the sefer and throws it on the floor to get across the message in the scene of a book is nothing if you don't become a better person. What happened was a few of the extras, they panicked. They see a sefer. Now, that was supposed to be part of the scene, and they didn't have to act it. They felt it, right? The actors had to act. The ones who are from religious backgrounds, this is shreklach. So what they cut. So the director runs over to them, picks up one of his svarim, and he shows them that, worry not. It's only a cover. It's a blank sefer. We were sensitive because we knew you're here. We were sensitive to be sure not to use real svarim for this scene. That's what we are taught. And this is a sensitivity that exists, right? It is something that does exist. And these are the tools, and these are the stories that indicate that we have, yes, indeed, a way to go, but we are on the right track. We are together, and right? Issues exist, but at least we know what we should be doing, and we should appreciate that it is done, and hopefully we could complete that process and merit a Geula Shlema with the Binyan Bet HaMikdash when we indeed feel that we are one nation. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you Bezrat Hashem next week.